The time has finally come. The good EVs are here. Now, anyone looking for an electrified ride in their life has a real choice of options from real brands they've actually heard of. Companies like Ford, Chevrolet, Hyundai, and yes, Volkswagen. This is the new ID.4, and while it's not the first EV that Volkswagen has brought here to the US, it is the first one that's built from the ground up to be battery powered. It's also the first EV from Volkswagen that they actually seem to want to sell, unlike the poor unloved e-Golf. Now, with choices on the market matching most budgets, we can stop obsessing over how far these things go on a charge and start worrying about the more important questions. Questions like, are they any good? Is this one any good? Let's find out. Together. Alright, so I just said we don't need to focus on the numbers so much anymore, but I know you, so let's get the numbers out of the way. This is the ID.4 First Edition, and it does an EPA-rated 250 miles on a charge thanks to a net 77 kilowatt-hour battery pack and rear-wheel drive. All-wheel drive will be available later this year, a $3,700 option, but Volkswagen isn't saying what that'll do to range just yet. In our testing with the rear-wheel drive ID.4 First Edition, we scored exactly 250 miles of mixed driving. Seriously, 250 on the nose. How's that for truth in advertising? That was driven mostly in moderate temperatures of between 50 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The all-wheel drive flavor will put down 302 horsepower, while rear-wheel drive does 201 horsepower. Torque is a healthy 228 pound-feet, and given this is an EV, you just know it's always there, silently waiting for your beck and call. Now, I'll talk about what that's like to drive in just a minute, but first I want to walk you through starting this thing because it's a little different than your average car. Your first thought would be to reach for the start-stop button, but there isn't one, at least not one that you need to use. The car turns itself on. That might feel a little weird if you're used to driving, say, just about anything other than a Tesla, but in practice, it makes a lot of sense. The car already knows when you're in and it knows when you're out. There's no engine to keep running on a cold morning, and you can remotely precondition it all through the app, so who needs a start button? So then you might think, well, maybe I'll just shift it into drive and then we'll go from there, but there's no shifter either, at least not in the traditional sense. The shifter is actually up here on the side of the gauge cluster, and it's a lot like the one found in the BMW i8. If you want to go forward, you just tilt this thing forward to go into drive. If you want to go backwards, you tilt it backward into reverse. Simple. Turning the ID.4 off is just as easy. Just click the P button here, and you get out. But we're not going to get out. We're going to go driving. So buckle up. The shifter isn't the only thing that's distinctive in here. The interior overall has kind of a nice fresh look to it, especially with these white highlights on this first edition model. Yeah, some of the materials are a little bit harsh, but overall it's got kind of a cool, fresh concept car vibe, which I really like. There's a gauge cluster behind the steering wheel, which is a little bit on the small side, but at least we have one. You get the typical stuff you'd expect, speed and range and things like that displayed on here, but it'll also pull turn-by-turn navigation even if you're using Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. A lot of manufacturers won't do that. It also gives you a look at which of your active safety systems are enabled, and the ID.4 is packed with that stuff. You've got everything from adaptive cruise control to automatic emergency braking with pedestrian detection, and pretty much everything you could hope for, making this a really nice, safe car. In the center system, we either have a 10 or a 12-inch touchscreen, which has definitely been influenced by iPhone or iPad design. There's a home button on the left, and to go from, say, navigation to media, you tap on the home button, and then you pick the section that you want to go to. That makes it easy and intuitive to use, but it's also a little bit clumsy that I always had to jump back home and then jump to the next section that I want to get to. Whereas a lot of infotainment systems will let you jump easily from navigation directly to the media controls, for example. And that's doubly frustrating here because everything is so incredibly slow. Watch as I slide from one page to the next. You'll also notice that almost everything in here is a touch control. Even the control for the shade of the panoramic glass roof is touch. Thankfully, the window controls are not, but you'll notice there's only one set of them. To control the rear windows, you'll need to toggle that on and off through, yes, yet another touch control. A somewhat finicky one at that. There are, of course, discrete controls in the rear seats for the passengers back there, who also get their own HVAC vents and USB Type-C connections. There's a ton of headroom and plenty of legroom back here, or fold those seats down to expose 64.2 cubic feet of cargo space. That's about the same as Volkswagen's 3-row Tiguan SUV, despite the Tiguan being 5 inches longer and 2 inches taller. So it's roomy, it's comfortable, it's got a nice interior, but what's the ID.4 like to drive? pretty great, I gotta say, but you gotta come into it with the right expectations. There are certain other EV manufacturers out there that are trying to build rocket ships. This is not a rocket ship. This is a comfortable, calm car to drive. Yes, there is a sport mode that I can enable here, and that does sharpen up the throttle response to make it to the point where it is a quick car. But this is not a particularly fast car, and it's not trying to be a fast car. Volkswagen has taken the time to engineer this to be a calm, comfortable, relaxing ride, a very calm and quiet ride too. But this is not a particularly fast car, so if you're not expecting it to be, that's fine. Then there are some other nice futuristic highlights too that remind you that you're in a bit of a car from the future. The ID light being my favorite thing. It's a row of LEDs that runs along the bottom of the windscreen here, and when you get in the car, it greets you. When you get out of the car, it lets you know to. And if you're using the integrated navigation, it'll even prompt you to turn by flashing on the left or the right. The only frustrating thing there is that it doesn't actually work with Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, and given how poor the integrated navigation is, you're probably going to want to use Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. So overall, Volkswagen has created a really calm, really confident, really nice car to drive in that I really enjoy, but I can't help feeling that there's just something missing. So what's missing? Character. Personality. The ID4 is a fine car to drive and a fine car to look at, but it's also a bit forgettable. Outside of the funky dashboard and the silly play pause buttons on the pedals, there's nothing truly charming or endearing here. It's all awfully utilitarian. And that's more than a little sad considering how fun Volkswagen's ID concepts were. There was the wild ID Buggy and the ID Buzz, a concept that everybody was talking about. I got a chance to drive that thing, and despite it being a very early prototype that threatened to rattle itself to pieces on every bump, I couldn't stop grinning from behind the wheel, and everybody who saw it was smiling too. The ID4, meanwhile, doesn't even come in any fun colors. In fact, right now, the base model doesn't come in any colors at all. As we film this, Volkswagen is only accepting orders in white, black, gray, and silver for the base ID4. It's another $4,500 to step up to the Pro S if you want blue. You want red? Another $2,000 in options to unlock that. So the ID4 has enough room for all your stuff, enough range to get you where you're going, and enough comfort to make sure that you're refreshed when you get there. If that weren't enough, it just won the World Car Awards Car of the Year. So does that mean it's a good car? It's a very good car. As a matter of fact, it's a great car. But I just wish it had a little bit more character.